Good morning, all of my loyal subscribers, friends, and family, and anybody who's new that's just tuning in. I am currently at my work, just chilling in my room. That's why we got like these weird tiles up there and stuff. I want to talk to y'all about the difference between Eastern living and Western living. Without further ado, let's jump in. So first things first, I'm just gonna say that one of my influences in saying these things is Theodore Roosevelt's book. Throw the name of it in the description. Basically, he said that per capita or per square mile in the East, there is more cattle, more livestock in general. An acre in the East versus 100 acres in the West. He basically said that in the West you could have 100 cows on 100 acres, and in the East you could have 100 cows on 1 acre. And that's exaggerated, that's not the exact numbers, but you get the point. It is easier to be a farmer in the East than it is to be a farmer in the West. And part of that reason is, in the West you need massive amounts of land to have a sufficient amount of livestock to sustain you and your family to make a decent amount of income, compared to people in the East who can solely farm on, let's say somebody has 100 acres in Wisconsin. They can subsist and have a decent income from their 100 acres. That could be their sole job, is just taking care of their livestock, taking care of that 100 acres. But to do that in the West, it's not going to happen. If you have 100 acres in the West and you are trying to make a decent living, I'm not saying it's impossible, but if you're trying to live in the West with 100 acres and farm, let's say you're trying to have cattle or grow stuff and have your livestock, simply it's going to be way harder. That's just the simple fact of the matter. I start to hear like arguments and conversations from people who are less educated about this subject, who say that people in America, specifically in the West, have too much land in general. I get this from some articles that I read about millionaires buying massive amounts of land here in Montana. They basically buy these giant ranches compared to the East. Let's say it's 5,000 acres, and they then ranch on it, or they farm. There's a difference between ranching and farming. Ranching is going to be a much larger piece of land, and in the West, you basically have to ranch in order to be profitable. You can't necessarily farm just because it's so difficult on this type of land, the aridness. But let's get back to the point. People say that people in the West own too much land. It's just simply not true. The amount of land that you need in the West is greater than you need in the East. I'm just going to simplify numbers again, but in order to have the same amount of cattle that person in Wisconsin has on 100 acres, let's say they have 100 cows on 100 acres, which is pretty small. To have 100 cows here in Montana, you might need 500 acres or 1,000 in order to feed those cattle year-round on your land. I'm not saying that you can't get by on buying hay with 100 acres and have 100 cows. You can. It's just going to be cutting into your profits, and it's going to be a higher overhead cost. It's perfectly fine for people to buy large amounts of land out here, especially if they're doing it for agriculture, because you need to have larger amounts of land in the West compared to the East in order to make this same amount of money to make a decent living. And I don't think that people in the West should have to pay larger property taxes for having larger amounts of property if they're doing agriculture. That's just, it would basically be saying, okay, you have 100 acres in Wisconsin and you have 100 cows, and the same person then moves to the West, buys 1,000 acres and that can only support 100 cows. They now have to pay more in property tax just because they're trying to make the same living. I think in Montana the property tax is actually lower for people who do agriculture for that reason, and I don't think that's wrong. Another thing that people say is, if it takes so much land to subsist, to be able to turn a profit in the West, then why are people still buying cows and trying to make a living out here doing agriculture, doing ranches? And the simple fact of the matter is that it comes down to your freedom of choice. People are free to choose that life if they want. Just rational reasons why somebody would do that is, and I've said this in my videos before, is that tradition plays a large part in it. People oftentimes inherit these larger ranches and they want to keep the family business going. Another reason is that in the West, there's not a whole lot that you can do on your land compared to the East. For example, I know that in Nevada, that land does not grow crops. It might grow alfalfa or hay, but at the end of the day, you can throw cattle on the desert and they can survive if you have enough land. But if you try and grow corn or just use your common sense, it's just not going to work. And so oftentimes that's the only thing that people can do. So we have tradition, that's the only thing the land is good for. The third thing would be that freedom that we talked about. People have the right to choose that lifestyle if they want it. And who are you to say that they have bought too much land and they need to get rid of it, or they need to be taxed higher, simply because they chose to buy that land, to make that investment, and to live that lifestyle? For one, you're not the person, not saying you are, but if you think that people have too much land and they shouldn't have it, you haven't bought this land, maybe because of poor life decisions. Maybe that person worked their butt off and they made a lot of money and they were able to buy that land. But at the end of the day, they made the decision to buy it under a certain set of circumstances, and they knew what they were getting into. And like I said, it's their freedom of choice, and who are you to argue with them and say that they shouldn't own that piece of land? They're the ones that bought it, not you. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you have a great day and you enjoyed some of my early morning ramblings. All right, adios.